It is my pleasure to introduce Enrique Chagoya, who currently is a professor of art and art history at Stanford University. His work is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the Whitney Museum in New York, the National Museum of American Art in Washington, D.C., and a whole slew of other important museums on that other coast of the United States, where he is from. I found it a bit difficult at first to figure out how exactly to introduce Enrique. He's a very humble and even-tempered man, but he is also just a little bit irreverent and whimsical, with a strong measure of humor mixed in his work. Working across many mediums, including printmaking, painting, large drawings, computer animation, Chagoya explores issues of illegal immigration, racial stereotypes, and xenophobia in a post-9/11 world. His work is a reflection on various cultural realities that he experienced during his life, first growing up in Mexico, later living in France, and finally becoming a U.S. citizen in the year 2000 after living nearly 20 years in the Bay Area. Chagoya's art is a product of collisions between historical visions, both ancient and modern, and marginal and dominant paradigms, often the result of a non-linear narrative with many possible interpretations. He comments on conflicts, not just violence, which is this year's theme in the College of Fine Arts, and not just conflicts that are on foreign soil, but also conflicts of morality. Last October, his work, The Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals, a piece referencing the child sex scandals within the Catholic Church, was attacked with a crowbar in the Loveland Museum of Art in Colorado. The incident sparked several protests and counter-protests, as well as a national debate. Chagoya defended his First Amendment rights, but also patiently explained his intentions by attempting to encourage dialogue with the local Christian community. He was successful in this attempt and is currently on very good terms with the clergy in Loveland. What I admire about Chagoya's work is that it forces the viewer to resist surface-level interpretations, asking that we attend to the tangible complexities of politics and culture in a post-colonial world of oppression and resistance. Histories are written and sometimes rewritten by the winners of wars, and Chagoya, thankfully, feels compelled to portray what perhaps has really happened. Please join me in welcoming Enrique Chagoya.
Thank you, Lynn, for your kind introduction, and thank you all of you for coming here, especially with this rain. Before I start, I'm just going to briefly say a few things that might have influenced my work. I grew up in Mexico City, and perhaps one of my earlier influences was that of my father. My dad gave me my first drawing and painting lessons when I was 7 years old. And he was an artist who, studied art and never made a living as an artist. He ended up working, had a great job eventually in the central bank in Mexico as an internal security investigator. That is, he had to cut people who were doing forgeries of money. The central bank in Mexico was the mint that print all the money bills, and they had to deal with a lot of people who invented their own money. And when my dad took me to his office, the first time I was maybe around 10 years old, his office was a museum of crime. He had forgeries of all kinds of money from anywhere in the world right next to an etching plate. And my favorite case is that one of a French artist who, in France, he did forgeries of Moroccan money, of francs. I mean, this is before there was the euro, many years ago in the late 40s, early 50s. And then he moved to Mexico City. And in Mexico City, he did forgeries not only of Mexican money, but he also did forgeries of dollar bills. He did forgeries of Cuban money, of Venezuelan money. And the Mexican police had a really hard time catching him up. I mean, it took about 10 years before they arrested him. And they got him when his girlfriend in France was really pissed, because he left her behind. Big mistake. She contacted the police, and he got arrested. Then my dad, used to go visit prisoners to interview them and just ask them, why they were doing things. But he was talking with them about art more than anything. He was talking artist to artist, and I think that works better than waterboarding, because they became friends with my dad, and they trusted him. Because also he was bringing art supplies. That's what works better than waterboarding. He brought art supplies, paper, India ink, brushes. And this artist, who was French but had an Italian alias, whose name was San Pietro, confessed to my dad that he did it for the thrills. Because, he went to the best art schools in France. He came from wealthy families. He didn't need to do forgeries. He just did it for the thrills. And thanking my father, he did a portrait of my dad from a black and white passport photograph, and it looks just like a black and white passport photograph of my dad, and with no brush strokes, and it's all India ink. Anyways, all this to say, when I was 10 years old, this left a big impression on me, and that's why I love to do look-alike things. I do a lot of appropriations from many sources, but then I change the original content, and I do something of my own kind of a statement. But I always like the challenge of doing something that might look almost like a forgery, without being a forgery, hopefully. Anyway, so this will give you an idea why I do things that look alike. I'm going to start with one of my favorite artists from all times. This is an engraving, or actually an etching by Francisco Goya, a Spanish painter, who did a series of etchings after Napoleon invaded Spain in the early 1800s with the purpose of liberating Spain from the monarchy. The monarchy in Spain were relatives of the monarchy in France, the Bourbons. And Napoleon thought that he was making a favor to the Spanish people. After they debunked the monarchy in France, he felt, well, Spain is left too with some relatives. To his surprise, the Spanish people didn't like to be liberated, so there was a big war. And at the end, Spain still has a monarchy. The Bourbons are still in Spain. But it was a horrendous war. And the only, one of the most interesting documents about that is Goya's etchings from the disasters of war. So this is one that I happened to see in my class, printmaking class, when I was at the San Francisco Art Institute as a student. And it really blew my mind when I saw in person this print. It was just really beautiful. And I was still a student. And I decided to try to do my first forgery. And so this was back in 1983. Let me see if I could enlarge it a little bit. And I kept the same title of the original print. It's called Against the Common Good. At the time, most of you probably were not even born yet. This is 1983. Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States, decided to invade or send support to guerrilla groups in Nicaragua who were fighting against the Sandinistas. The Sandinistas got rid of a dictator, Somoza, who came from a family of dictators that stayed in power for 30 years. And they promised elections after they took over. But this was the times when we have the Cold War, and the Reagan administration decided that Nicaragua was communist, that it was on the side of the Soviet Union, even though the revolution there was a coalition of many groups, lefties, liberals, people with moderate views, religious groups, a lot of Christian groups were part. It was, it's more than anything, it was an alliance of different groups. And, that was something unimportant to the administration, so they sent support to the Contras, and even went against the vote of Congress. Congress didn't want to give support to them, but he still did it. And Ronald Reagan declared himself a contra. So I found this etching that Goya did, and I left the word contra on the bottom left. You could see it. And so it was like made for this character. So I'm going to keep going. I did a whole series of them. I keep working, and here at the university, I'm working on 2 plates based on the capricious. I mean, the disasters of war. So I'm going to keep moving to another print. This one is Great Deeds with the Dead, also by Goya from the same year. And another thing I do is I like to mix sort of like a yin and yang elements in work. So I don't know if you ever have gone to Disney World. You know, when you walk in, it says, "Welcome to the happiest place on earth," you know, artificial happiness. But then a real unhappiness to me is war. So sometimes I like to mix both things, the happy and the unhappiest place on earth. Here in the background, you see a gas mask of a Mickey Mouse gas mask. And if you Google Mickey Mouse gas mask, you could actually see the actual prototype that Disney did right in the 1940s, 1942. And apparently, I don't know if it was ever mass produced. I never seen one in person, but I believe there is one in the Disney Museum. But certainly you could see photographs of it online. But anyway, so I decided to mix both of them in an etching. So, so here we are, Great Deeds with the Dead. All the etchings are about the same size as the original prints by Goya. So I'm going to keep moving. This is from a different series by Goya as well. This is from the Caprichos. In the Caprichos, Goya strikes superstitious beliefs in the Spanish people. And I like this one. This one is hunting for teeth. And it was believed that if you get a tooth from a hangman, you will get very good luck. And to me, what is, how can I say, more astonishingly surprising is not that somebody will believe that. It's that somebody will walk out in the street and look for somebody hanging from the trees. That, to me, was the scary part of the story. I mean, what kind of a Spain was that in the 1800s? Anyway, so I did my version of that. With kind of like a stereotype of a Mexican mouse, you know, like a Speedy Gonzales, except that this is kind of like a rat fink. I don't know if you ever see this late 60s, early 70s rat fink character by, you know, Ed Roth was the artist. So I grew up with that, actually, in Mexico City. So here I decided to mix rat fink, and this is Mexican fink, and Snow White. Another print from the same series, from the Caprichos. This is perhaps his most famous one. This is The Sleep of Reason Produces Monsters. And here the only thing is that for today's standards, I mean, supposedly the owls and the bats and the cat were monsters here. But today, who's afraid of owls? I mean, we protect the owls. They are endangered species. I mean, the bats, we're worried that the bats are getting sick. They're really good for agriculture. And, you know, they help people to keep pesticides away from agriculture. So the bats are really important for that. And they are dying all the way from the East Coast towards the West Coast here because they're having a fungus. I mean, people actually worry about bats. So they are not scary anymore. Cats, I love cats. I have 2 cats, and I have a black cat on top of that. So, and they believe in occupying everything too. They occupy your house. They're supporting Occupy Wall Street for sure. So they occupy the counter. They occupy or food. Anyway, so nobody's afraid of any of these things. So. I decided to just add real scary things, like, you know, stealth bombers, Mohawk missiles, Apache helicopters, and right on the lower right, you might see a couple of nuclear plants. which could be more scary, like what happened in Japan and Fukushima, which is a real tragedy. And here I just left a couple of owls, more like a companion pets than monsters. Then this is the very first drawing I did. I mentioned this in an interview that was published today, or yesterday, I think, in BU today. And this is the first time I did a drawing. I didn't want to make art. I just wanted to make like an editorial cartoon. This was for a campaign against intervention in Central America back in the 1980s. And Central America was becoming and still in many places, Latin America is a very violent place, let alone the drug wars in Mexico or Colombia. It has been a very conflictive place for centuries, pretty much. But when Latin Americans try to get out of it, sometimes they just don't get much help from many places. And on top of that, they could be in conflict with their northern neighbor. Anyway, so in this case, I decided to make this kind of like an editorial cartoon. As I said, I thought after this was a national campaign against intervention in Central America. And I thought nobody will care about this drawing after the show. I had it in an exhibition at the school, at the San Francisco Art Institute. And I thought it's going to end up in the closet, but to my surprise, actually people end up showing it in many, many places. And right now, it's in the collection of the San Jose Museum of Art. From the same period, I did this other drawing. This one is called Nose Job. And this is actually at Stanford in the museum. And all these drawings are really big, 7 by 7 feet, about the same size as you see it in the screen. Let me enlarge it a little bit. You could see a little bit of the fingerprints on the wall. So I'm going to move kind of fast because I have a lot of images and a lot of issues to talk about. So, so these are more from the same series. I keep drawing charcoal drawings until today. This one right now is at the Schulz Museum. Schulz is, Charles Schulz, the guy who did Peanuts. Charlie Brown and Snoopy. That's where this drawing is right now, in an exhibition of cartooning and contemporary art. This is George Bush's father. And this is when he invaded Panama to get rid of the dictator there, Manuel Noriega, who was accused of corruption and drug dealing, except that Manuel Noriega was he was working for him when George Bush's father was the director of the FBI, Noriega was an employee of the CIA. So everything he was accusing Noriega, he was an accomplice to. So it was interesting how at some point the friends of today are the enemies of tomorrow. That happened also in Iraq. Saddam Hussein was very much supported, by Ronald Reagan when Iraq was in war with Iran. So at that time, the US gave a lot of weapons of mass destruction to Saddam Hussein. Eventually, he became the enemy. And that's when the first war in the Gulf took place, back in the early 1990s. I think it was maybe 1991, I'm trying to remember. But anyway, that's when I did this drawing. This one is called Holy Order. And it's just about how actually behind the religious conflicts that could be in a war, I think there's more like an economic conflict. In the Middle East, it's very obvious that it's the oil. So that's why I did the big tower on the front. It's really hard to see, but there's sort of like a double self-portrait in the eyeballs that are popping out of the skull head. So you could see me a little bit with the arms open with some lights let me see if I could, so there you could, went off the screen. Anyway, never mind. So another of my pieces that is more like a yin and yang. It's a little more abstract. It could be basically anything. It could be all kinds of borders that people build between themselves. A lot of my work is about borders between people. It's not just geographic borders, because those are more visible. It's more about other borders that are invisible, but they are just as real. You know, borders between gender, borders between social classes, national borders, of course, but there is cultural boundaries as well. They are invisible, but they are very, very real. So I decided to make an abstraction of all those things, because at the end, in all sides of borders, humanity is pretty much the same, and it's just incredible how conflictive people are when people cross a little bit a border. I made this drawing also in the next Iraqi war, after. This is in 2004. These are kind of large drawings too, about the same size as in the screen. This one is untitled. And it could be, I don't know, could be Wall Street playing with new toys. Some, religious rhetoric was used for the war in Iraq. At some point, some politicians were using the word crusade. Later, they had to backpedal because it sounded like a religious war. But there was a lot of, how can I say, just that kind of rhetoric, these guys in the real motives of the war. So I decided to just make a contrast, which is absurd. It's something like ridiculous to see if there was a real religious militaristic element behind any religious icon, like in this case, Christian icons. This one is called Roadmap, and it's not very clear what is happening, not even to me. It seems like there is an impasse between secular and religious imagery. You don't know if the helicopter is about to shoot. This is Alice in Wonderland by the end, with her little friend. I don't know if you could see it a little bit. Alice in Wonderland with Dodo, the dodo bird, and the flamingo, which is, it may be saving the helicopter from crashing. Anyway, this other one, this is the way it is in the original work, Liberty, backwards. Could be about our dependency on fossil fuels and, the big problems we have associated with that dependency. This reminds me of my cats again, because my cats run like crazy all over the house like that. I don't know if any of you who might have a cat, you know that they suddenly run like 100 miles per second for no reason. So this is like a nuclear head. It's really hard to see, but everything looks just pretty hopeless, like pollution and craziness. It's hard to see there's a nuclear bomb on top, like blowing up. But in the lower right corner, right on the neck, there is where is Waldo character. I don't know if you ever played with Waldo, but it's hard to see here, but it's the only happy thing going on. Very often I like to put something to balance the drama of what's going on in the work. Here somebody asked me if this was about the first and second Bush administrations, the father and the son. But I say, no, this is about how history repeats itself over and over. Empires come and go and get raised and collapse. But it's not about the father and the son. If I wanted to do like the second Bush administration, then I would have done this, which is what I did. I guess I don't need to tell you who's dopey. I guess you could see Osama bin Laden on the left, and Tony Blair is the prince, and Condi, in the center, and all the. But anyway, so I'm gonna move on. This is history; it's gone. But anyway, the idea of editorial cartooning is still present with me. Then I did more appropriations, more like forgeries. In these cases, after Philip Gaston, another of my favorite artists. Philip Gaston did a whole series of drawings to make a satire of Richard Nixon. And I realized what happened in the Nixon administration was very close to, in a way, to what was happening to George Bush. They both went to, very elite colleges like Yale and Harvard. So the only thing I did in the drawings was to change the face of Nixon, and I replaced that for George Bush. Same thing here, the police of the world. Here is with the Vice President, Dick Cheney, and trying to look for ideas. The other way around, too. And notice the gun on the. I made this before Dick Cheney shot his friend, by the way, I swear. These are from 2004, and I think I made this before the elections in 2004. And I think Dick Cheney shot his friend in 2005, a little bit after. Sometimes it's scary to see like some things happen that you draw, like a premonition. Here it's with Donald Rumsfeld on the right-hand side. They're like trying to understand some Arabic after they destroy it. Here, photo opportunity as well. Then here they are on the beach. Usually when they were having a vacation, there was like a terrorist attack somewhere. Here again, the word Billy is after the preacher Billy Graham, because Billy Graham played a big role in the conversion to Christianity of George Bush. And I wish George Bush was real Christian, because I would hold hands with him. Like if he was real Christian, he would have stepped down from power to start with. Like a lot of the Christian attributes is actually to move away from power and from wealth, and lack of arrogance, to be humble. None of that was any of these people. But anyways, Billy Graham also was a very good friend of Richard Nixon. So I didn't have to change the word Billy. That word Billy was in the original drawing. So here I made a blend, a hybrid of Richard Nixon and George Bush. So this is like Richard Bush or George Nixon. Now we're going to move to Obama. I also have done a lot of things about Obama lately. This is when he, I made this one right before he took, after he won the elections. And I decided to do a piece where, this is like a carriage, but it has no wheels. It's going nowhere. Even no matter how hard they are hitting the horses, the thing with the wheels doesn't seem to move anywhere. All the people are green here because they are, the title of this piece is called Atlas and the Arugulas. And I made arugulas because Obama at some point said he liked arugulas. So I decided all these like vegetable, an army of vegetables all around them. And then on top of the world is Hillary Clinton. And then on the lower right hand, it's the vice president, Joe Biden, and behind is Michelle Obama. And Obama is sweating, carrying the world. Did another piece lately. This one, it says, you will not escape. Another one after Goya. Let me see if you could see. There's a tiny, hope you might be able to see it, a seal on the bottom with a KKK chicken. So it's like a little KKK chicken with flames in the background. I'm sorry I cannot enlarge it without going off the screen. But then this is the one that was used for the poster here. You could see this one in person if you go to New York. It's at the Metropolitan Museum right now in an exhibition. It's called Infinite Jest. It's caricature from Leonardo to Levine. So they put me in really nice company. And this etching is the end of the exhibition, if you go there. And also there is a catalog, and this is in the last 2 pages of the catalog. It's called The Headache. And what we see here is all these demons. The red and the blue represent maybe the 2 political parties around, but the other demons could be some demons that may be a creation of Obama himself, things that are backfiring to him. In any case, it seems like the medicine he has in his left hand is not helping very much. So Now, I'm going to move to other sources of my work. This is a painting by Robert Campin. It's from the Renaissance. This is from a book that I recommend to all of you. It's called The Sexuality of Christ in Renaissance Art and Modern Oblivion by Leo Steinberg. And it's a book that focuses on the sexuality of Christ as a way to analyze why some paintings in the Renaissance focus on the subject that Christ was a human being, flesh and bones. So they focus on the sexuality because of that. Yet there are some paintings that are, I don't know if artists today could paint them today. Like in this case, there is a whole chapter in this book where the author dedicates really like at least about 80 pages analyzing what's happening here. So I don't know if you could see a little erection there going on, and they're kissing each other in the mouth. So that's not the only, I mean, the whole book is just like that. So if this is another page from the same book. This is The Man of Sorrows by Martin van Heemskerk, a Flemish artist from the 1500s, 1525. Again, same thing, unless there is a pet underneath the clothing, there's something going on there for sure. It's a little bunny rabbit. So I decided to use this for one of my drawings in the 1990s. It's called Not Good for Funding. That's when, ultra-conservative Senator Jesse Helms decided to attack the National Endowment for the Arts because artists like Andrés Serrano, who did, I don't know if you ever saw that photograph, Peace Christ, was getting money from the government, or there was, homoerotic art like by Robert Mapplethorpe, and also he was getting another grant from the NEA. So unfortunately, that controversy killed the money that the National Endowment for the Arts was giving to artists. Artists were applying, anybody were able to apply at the time. You were able to get up to $20,000. And you could just submit your slides, and if you were lucky, they were reviewed by other artists, and they will vote who will get that money. I benefit myself from that a couple of times, and it really helped my career. But that no longer exists, and it's just really, really sad that artists today don't have that resource, because it's really, really important. I hope sometime, I don't know when, the National Endowment for the Arts resuscitates. Anyway, so I deal with a lot of religious subject matter is often. Most of my work is not religious, but once in a while I deal with that. When it deals with violence, when it has something to do that betrays the original purpose of the religious spirit. Like in the conquest of the Americas. In the conquest, especially in certain areas like the Incas or central Mexico, the conquest was not only a genocide, but also a culturicide. Cultures were totally exterminated. And one part that really affected me was when I read about the destruction of all the Precolumbian books by religious groups. Just one single priest, Fray Diego de Landa, was responsible for burning all of the Mayan books. Today, there are only 4 Mayan books in the world. There's the Codex Madrid in Spain, the Codex Paris in France, the Codex Dresden in Germany, and there's one codex in Mexico City. That's it. Then there is 0 Aztec books. Even though there was the largest library of books in the continent at the time, as is described by some indigenous people that survived the conquest, it was a huge building with rooms after rooms full of books. In 1519, the Conquistadors pulled all of the books from the library, piled them up, and burned them. When the indigenous people saw that, there was a mass suicide. The Spaniards could not stop the Indians from hanging themselves from trees, from jumping off pyramids. It was worse than the burning of the Alexandrian library. The library in Alexandria also has been burned by Christian groups in the past. And luckily, some things survive in Alexandria, like the Greek philosophy. It was in the Alexandrian library. We are lucky those books were not burned. We don't know what was lost in the Aztec library of Texcoco. The Aztec library of Texcoco, by the way, was created by an Aztec king at the peak of the Aztec Empire, King Netza, or Netzahualcoyotl, or the feather coyote, that's how it translates, who was against human sacrifice. King Netza was an architect who decided that nobody needed to be sacrificed to worship their god, and instead he organized poetry festivals in his town, and he is the one who created this library. Luckily for him, he died about the same year that Columbus arrived to the Americas, so he never met the Spaniards. But that's something you are not going to see in movies like Apocalypto. In that movie you see like the Mayans are really violent. Most of the times when you hear about pre-Columbian history, they focus on the violence that took place at the time. And yes, they were violent people. There was empires, there were wars of conquest as well. The Aztecs also were burning books of other cultures they conquered. Yet there were conflicts within themselves. There were some people who were against that too. Just like today here. I mean, we live in a very complex society. So some people are in favor of the war, a lot of people are against war. So that was not too different then. Maybe the Aztecs were the USA of the pre-Columbian cultures, because when the conquest took place, everybody else joined the Spaniards against the Aztecs. Nobody liked the Aztecs. Anyways, today there are only other 19 pre-Columbian books from the Oaxaca region, from the Mixtec Zapotec area. And there is a lot of Aztec books that were painted after the conquest, but those are influenced by the Renaissance style. In any case, when I learned about it, I was reading history books that left an impression on me. And I ran into this drawing that was done by an Aztec anonymous artist, and it's depicting the execution of indigenous people who refused to become Christian. And there is a very interesting story in a book by a Uruguayan writer, Eduardo Galeano, that describes an Aztec Indian in Mexico who was about to be burned. And the soldiers and the priests tell him to convert into Christianity before they execute him, so he will go to heaven. So the Aztec Indian asked them, so are you all going to heaven? And they say, yes, we are going to heaven. So the Aztec Indians say, well, I don't want to go to heaven. So anyway, so I decided to start making my own books. And I'm gonna pass this painting. I used that image in that painting. But so these are more like pages of the books I did based on pre-Columbian style. And I used the same kind of paper that the pre-Columbian books were using, the amate paper. This one is called Hands, and in the, oh, that's too big. Then on the lower side, you see the head, in this head, soldiers of Columbus cutting the hands of the Taino and Arawak Indians in the Caribbean. Within 50 years, the indigenous population of the Caribbean was extincted. They are gone. The Tainos, the Arawak, don't exist today. So that was part of the kind of the Holocaust that was taking place. In 1492, at the same time, within Spain, there was a whole shift of politics, and Queen Isabella and Ferdinand decided to turn Spain into a monocultural society rather than having three religions that was, it was Islamic, Jewish, and Christian. They decided to go Christian only. So they expelled the Jews out of Spain and the Muslims as well, or the Jews have to be turned into Christians, and it was just a whole persecution worldwide. So the Indians were not alone in that case. This one is another one. It's called Crossing. And this is about immigration and illegal aliens. And for me, the favorite image of an illegal alien is Superman, because he came from out of space. And And just like the conquistadors and the pilgrims, he didn't have a passport. The conquistadors didn't have a passport. The pilgrims didn't have a passport. And they acted against the law of the land of many nations all over the Americas. So sometimes I question, the history of this country owes a lot to immigration, but I think it owes a lot to illegal immigration, especially in the beginning of the country as a colony. Today's illegal immigrants, for me, are like not too different than the pilgrims. And actually, they bring a lot of good economic wealth here. It's very interesting to see what happened in places like Arizona, where they got rid of a lot of the labor, the immigrant workers, or Alabama recently, where they got rid of all of the farm workers, and all the growers were going out of business because nobody wants to pick up tomatoes or whatever they grow in the heat of the sun over there. So I try to honor the labor behind illegal immigration. But in the other hand, a lot of xenophobic stereotypes are thrown against, undocumented immigrants. Like, they are savages, pretty much. So I try to play the role of the primitive, the savage. Here, poor Mickey got in the wrong place at the wrong time. But this is a portrait of former governor of California, Pete Wilson. So he's right in the middle. This one is called The Governor's Nightmare. And, the upper left corner is this. So it's another kind of ritualistic. This is like a communion where you drink the blood of Christ. I don't know I grew up Catholic, so that's how I know the rituals. And so it's another kind of cannibalistic ritual. But it's spiritual, and you're supposed to eat the flesh of Christ represented by the bread, and the blood represented by the wine. So from that perspective, this drawing is kind of religious from the Aztec perspective. Another one, a different version. This one is written. This is right before the apartheid was over in South Africa, and I had a South African friend. We were organizing art against apartheid at the time, and I decided to write in Afrikaans. That's the language they speak there. Right in the middle, it says, "I want to wake up now." This is called Xenophobic Nightmare in a Foreign Language. Then that took me to other places, eventually, to something I call reverse anthropology. And this is, the opposite of what people like the surrealists thought of primitive cultures. For the surrealists, primitive cultures were the childhood of humanity. People like Picasso used to appropriate African masks because he loved them. Then he used that African style to develop his Cubist paintings. Or people like Henry Moore used Aztec sculpture to develop his seated figures. Or Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, did buildings in Los Angeles based on Mayan architecture. Or even people like Joseph Albers, the abstract painter that paints squares. He did a architectural rendering of a chapel at some point, and it was based on pre-Columbian architecture as well. So I thought, what will happen if the other way around took place? What if an Aztec Indian took European art with the same love that Picasso had for the African masks, but turned it around? And this is what's happening in these works. So you see an Aztec kind of image on top of this image by Rembrandt, Lady with Fan. And I did a whole series of those. I did like about 40 of them. I'm just going to have you show you a couple of them. This one is the Death of Columbus. And let me show you a close-up. I guess I don't need to translate the Coke sign because it doesn't say Coca-Cola. Now I'm going to move to another painting here. This is another portrait of conquistadors. If you thought it was a portrait of Christ, you were totally wrong. This is a portrait of a conquistador that wants to see everything Christianized. And this painting was commissioned by the San Jose Museum in the Bay Area. And they organized an exhibition of contemporary artists who deal with religious art that is included in their work. And it was complementary to an exhibition of Mexican retablos, these little paintings on tin. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're really beautiful little folk art paintings. They depict miracles that take place, and as a thank you gesture, some people commissioned these little paintings describing what happened there. So that was an exhibition parallel to this other one. So they make a big press release. I was doing this painting with a good friend of mine, a Filipino painter, Manuel Ocampo, and he's worse than me. I think they were asking for a double whammy. Manuel, he paints really violent religious imagery. And when the curator came to see this work, she was not very happy with it. It was half the way done. She said that it was very angry. And we were not really angry when we were painting. Actually, we were laughing about it. We explained to her, this is not a religious icon. This is a conquistador who wants to look religious. And a lot of dictators think they are put by, like if you think of absolutism, all the kings thought they were put there by God, so they see themselves as God. So there was just that idea behind this painting. So that's why we put even like an Aztec eye. We have like some guy with a gold tooth. So it's all these things, and a conquistador, kind of like a musketeer face. But we told her, let us finish it. We're not done with it. So we wrote in the upper part of the painting, devotion as a formal device. And then I decided to add kitty cats because I like cats. So I put a little cat on the lower right corner. You could see it. Manuel painted a little bunny rabbit on the left. I added butterflies. Let me see if I could enlarge it a little bit. You could see a little bit of the butterflies. They have little Indian, Mexican heads. Let's see if I could. No, it's too far. Anyway, so they came back later, and they still didn't like it. But they said, well, but you commissioned this painting, and you're not going to show it. They put it in the show. And they said, no problem. We are going to pay you for it, but we need to borrow other paintings from you. So we say, okay, that's a good apology. They gave us the money. We lend them other paintings. But then a critic from the San Jose Mercury News, when they came to the show, and the painting was not in the exhibition, and this is a huge painting. So it's about 12 feet wide by 8 feet high. And they didn't see the work. The critic was told that the curator didn't like the painting, and the painting was in my studio. So he came to my studio, saw the painting, he loved it, and the next day he wrote a whole page about this painting should have been included in the show. Then the museum called me and asked for the painting. And then we say, no, we're going to keep the painting because you broke the contract. They even talked to their lawyers. They couldn't do anything about it. They broke the contract. We didn't break the contract. And they had been paid us already. So we kept the money, and we kept the painting. Okay, and the story doesn't end there. It gets better. A year later, my dealer in San Francisco sold this painting to a collector in Spain who loved it, a very Catholic collector who loved the painting. And I said, great, that's it. So I took it from my studio, put it in the back of my pickup truck. This was 10 p.m. at night, and when it's my way to San Francisco from Palo Alto, where I have my studio, right in the middle of the freeway, I hear a bang in the back of my truck, and the panel, it's 3 panels, it's a triptych. The 3 panels went off the back of my truck. I just felt like I had a kick in my stomach. It's like I just couldn't believe it. It was not my painting anymore. It was a lot of money. And I just drove off the freeway, and I just cut my breath again, and then back in reverse over the shoulder of the freeway. I got off my truck, and I saw cars running over my painting. It was just like the worst experience I ever had. It was like seeing somebody killing my pets, and I could not do anything about it. So I don't know if it was the most stupid thing I did or brave thing, but I rescued the painting. I went one after each other panel, and I was like really shaking. I had to take it out of the stretcher bars. They were all broken. A truck went over some of them, and so my hands were bleeding. So eventually, I had to feed the painting in the back of my truck. Then I got home, took the painting out of the truck, put it in my garage, And luckily, there were tones on the painting, but they were along the lines, you know, those blue and red lines. Some of the tones were straight there. So I was able to fix it and paint it over. And thanks to the fact that we paint the painting very messy, people didn't even notice. So I told my dealer, you know, this is what happened, and but I could fix it, and I did. I put new stretcher bars. They told it the collectors, and the collectors still bought it, and they loved it. And then I explained that's why in the back of the painting you see a wheel mark. So on top of a painting, you got a print, one-of-a-kind print. So that was a very happy end story. They told me that when they put their house in the painting in their house, they have a dance. They like so very happy end of the painting. So I'm gonna move faster because I think we're running out of time, and I want to get to stories. So I did more paintings when I was living in France, just contrasting, you know, how Europeans were portraying Native American cultures and how they portray themselves. Here in the background, you see a painting by Edouard Manet. And in the front, image from Theodore de Brie, Belgian artist who traveled throughout the Americas, and that's the way he described Brazilian Indians. But then I decided, you know, people are the same in Europe or in the Americas. We're the same species, we're the same genome. And I decided to paint like flesh tones all over. So it's kind of like paintings hanging around like a museum, like salon style, like what you will see in some place in the Louvre. So anyways, but I did a whole series of those works. There's another French painting in the background by Gustave Courbet, The Origin of the World. And then I decided to make like a minimalist Aztec painter. Also painting the origins of the world, but in the Aztec mythology, the origins of the world are in colors. So it's blue, white, red, and black for 4 directions of the universe. So these 2 contrasting visions of the origins of the world. More reverse anthropology here. That's African sculpture, having fun with self-portrait of Picasso. Right in Giverny. I live in Giverny, in this place, which is beautiful, for 3 months, and I could not escape from painting it. So that's the way I painted it. More reverse anthropology. This is a series of cans I did. Every can I did has its own recipe in the back. I'm going to read it for some people in the back. It's a quick meal in 5 minutes, anthropologists with noodles, and your favorite sandwich. A quick and simple meal that's fun to eat. Add a delicious bowl of America's favorite anthropologist with noodle soup with lots of yummy noodles to your favorite sandwich. Eating an anthropology is so much fun, you're sure to smile. So I did a whole set of them. Artist brains with rice, cream of dealer, art historian alphabet, fundraisers adobo, museum director stripe, models meat, anthropologist with noodles again, collector's broth, curator's liver, and critic's tongue. Yummy. So anyway, so I'm going to move a little faster now because I might take a lot of time. I made a lot of prints based on immigration. This one sees works to suggest that the act finally distills into something dense and unknowable. That's Illegal Aliens Guide to Critical Theory. Some people think it's a self-portrait. It's almost a self-portrait. Because I have a bike accident a couple of years ago, and actually, let's see if you could barely see it here, but it's like a bike accident on the bottom of the print, and eventually it's like a Mexican chicken and ends up in the hospital and gets better. Let me keep moving. I'm going to move to what made the news last year. It was this book, The Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals. Yeah, this looks a little better. I made this book in 2003, right after a scandal in the church took place about pedophilia in the Catholic Church that keeps going on until today. I think there's a Catholic priest that is about to be going to trial. It's the very first one that ever goes into trial. And it's something that made me very upset at the time. This is 2002, 2003. And I had a lot of gay and lesbian friends. My neighbors, I have neighbors who are very happy gay couple. They have never threatened our marriage. I'm a straight, happily married. Neither my wife or I ever felt that our marriage was threatened by having this friendship with these great friends across the street. They go to church as well, and they sing in religious chorus. At school, I have faculty that are gay and lesbian faculty that are very good friends of mine. I have gay and lesbian students. So I felt they were being very discriminated against. And in the other hand, the same Catholic Church is against, birth control, against all these things, like in a very moralistic approach. So I felt this kind of contradiction is something that bothered me a lot. And also, this is 2003. That's when also there was all this religious rhetoric about going to war in Iraq as a crusade. So there's a little bit of a war scene on the right. And then I decided, well, this is for me my way to express how the spiritual gets corrupted. So for me, this is not a religious icon. This is just a mix of a comic book character and an icon, but it's not the icon itself. But I got a nice review in Fox News. Fox News decided that this was pornography. And my favorite part was they say, the Stanford professor it portrays Jesus having sex. And I was, wow, I didn't put any Jesus there, and they even blur some areas, and there is no nudity, there is no sex going on there, but they made it believe. So needless to say, it created a wave of anger, and I got suddenly tons of hate mail, a lot of vitriolic, scary emails. I had to call the police. It's just it was crazy. But in the middle of the messages, I got a very friendly message from a pastor from the same town. This print was part of a group exhibition of printmaking. The exhibition did not even have a political theme. It was just about printmaking, and it was. For about 4 months in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver, nobody complained. The same year I had it in the Bay Area, in 2 places, in 2 solo shows, nobody complained there. Simultaneously to Loveland, this same print was in Washington, D.C., and nobody complained there. But it was the time before the elections, and suddenly a politician in Loveland decided that he could use this to protest that museums should not have taxpayers' money to present controversial art. And he contacted a local religious group that was very fanatical about it, and it made the news. But this pastor who contacted me was very curious to know what was my opinion or what I meant with this work. And I explained to him the same thing I told you. I said, it's about the pedophilia, the contradictions with the church, with, their homophobia and the conquest, etc. And he responded to me and said, thank you for your thoughtful explanation. If you ever come to Loveland, it will be an honor to meet you. And I say, wow, I wrote him back immediately. I was so happy. I say, I wish more Christians were like you. And so he wrote me back, and he said, I was with tears in my eyes when you say that. I'm glad you wrote me back. So we became very, very good friends. Next day, he asked me, will you do a non-corrupt picture of Christ for my church? And I said, well, I'm not religious myself. Plus, nobody knows how Christ looked like. So I told him, some people, let me see if I can make it a little smaller. There is a Korean Christ, there's a Russian Christ, Ethiopian, Native American Christ, there's a Hungarian Christ, Mexican Christ, African Christ, Japanese, Chinese Christ, European, American Christ. And I told him, the first portraits ever done of Christ were done at hundreds of years after the time he's supposed to existed. So nobody really knows how it looked like, and I'm not going to be an exception. But if your congregation takes it from me, I'll be very, very glad to do it. And Pastor Jonathan Wiggins, that's his name, went to his congregation and asked if it was okay for me to do a painting for their congregation. And he read our letters to the congregation. And the congregation accepted with a standing ovation. And it was on a video online. You could see it online if you go to the site. And when I saw it online, I said, oh, now I am in trouble. I have to do this painting. So I did. I was very glad to do it. But anyways, before that, somebody went just totally off and got really angry about it. You know, what they hear in Fox News, in ultra-conservative radio stations and blogs. And it's a truck driver who drove all the way from Montana to Colorado, got into the museum with a crowbar and destroyed the work. So thank you for the publicity, I have to say, because that made the news everywhere. I was all the way to Russia, Mexico, but I have to admit, I didn't welcome that kind of publicity. It was totally a complete distortion of the content of my work. And of course, Fox News and none of these people were mentioning anything about pedophilia, anything about the homophobia. For me, you know, the pedophilia it's a crime that is worse than anything any artist could imagine. So what happened in reality is worse than any art, controversial art could be. But in any case, I still did the painting. I stuck to my word. I said, you know, the pastor Wiggins apologized for his community, whatever. I said, you know, it's a product of the distortion and mass media miscommunication. So I did the painting, and I might have to because it's a file that is very big, so I might have to show it to you in a different format. Let me try to escape it. All right. Now let me get to media here. Just 1 second, and let me make it smaller. So here you can see the whole painting. I decided to make sure they understood that the message of Christ was love, not violence. So I put the word love. I didn't think they were going to accept it, but they loved it. They liked it even better with that word. So I did another, well, this is a blow-up of the same painting. So I sent the painting to Loveland. Now they put it in their church. I went in person. I met the congregation. Another great ovation. I was very humble to see that. And I was very touched by it. And they respected that I'm not religious. Nobody tried to convert me. And until today, we're really good friends. And he almost came here. He was about to be invited by the theological, the School of Theology here. I hope they bring him. I think he'll be a great story to hear. Let me go back to the slideshow, and let me just finish up with, after that experience, I decided that if I wanted to do something more meditational. So I'm going to go quickly through a lot of my work that I already explained. This one is at the Museum of Modern Art, by the way, the same idea, picturing the corruption of the spiritual. And it was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York about last year. But anyway, I'm just going to go quickly to end my talk, and I'm going to end up with maybe with the most recent meditational works. For me, you know, my work is a way in which I exorcise my own demons, the way I just get rid of my own personal anxieties. And I don't try to convince anybody of what I think. And I don't try to illustrate anything. But that's just the way I feel, and that's just the way I like to express my feelings in this kind of work. And all of these are just books that I did, again, based on the destruction of those pre-Columbian books. And also I've done paintings like these ones that are traveling right now in an exhibition. This is about immigrants, undocumented immigrants in the army, as well as, you know, in the service industry. Interesting to me how undocumented immigrants are trusted in the army, but sometimes they are not trusted here when they're just helping with some very mundane and difficult tasks. Sometimes I do non-representational work. I'm going to enlarge this. This is something I really like to say to myself. Don't do today what you can do tomorrow. It's my self-portrait as a lazy Mexican. Anyway, I have this in my house. So when I want to relax, I look at this painting. This is another one I did. Illegal Aliens Guide to Greater America. So it's like a picture of the universe. Quantum physics, illegal aliens. This is how Cubans cross the ocean, for real. They have made amphibious boats out of 1940s cars. This was a taxi with 13 people, was stopped by the Coast Guard, and it was sunk. The very first boat they did was a GM truck, and also that was stopped and sunk. Let me see if I can enlarge it. You can see it a little better. Yeah, there were museums that were begging for those cars, and it's too sad they were sunk. In the third attempt, they made it. So Cubans, when they touch ground here, they get instant acceptance as immigrants. But these people were so ingenious. I think they could work for GM. I mean, who will not buy an amphibious car today? Especially people who live like in New Orleans, San Francisco, New York City. All these places are threatened by global warming, and we're going to get the water going up. We might need to have an amphibious car very soon. I don't know about Boston, but we will need it in San Francisco for sure. Anyway, so this here, like happy party of illegal aliens playing music from all places. Originally, this was a painting by George Bingham. He's an artist who used to paint people crossing the Mississippi River. Although in this painting, this is more crossing the Rio Grande. So anyways, I'm going to finish with my work. Let me go towards the end. And just to end with my meditational drawings right here. And I'm going to have to show them right here. Sorry for this delay. Oh, looks like actually I could show them completely. By the way, I thought they were not going to fit. Oh, I was right. Sorry. This one, I'm levitating in my dreams, but I will wake up soon. Let me just get rid of all of these other parts. And let me move this more towards the middle. Okay, great. These are very transparent, ghostly images. I draw in the back. I don't know if you could see the ghost of Prince. You could barely see. You could see Obama on the lower right hand. Here, this is another one. This one is the artist is out meditating, and will be back shortly. And I don't know if you see that there's a couple here with a baby in the middle. But the baby is like a little worm. It's like a centipede. You see it? That's what you see in these drawings when you get really close. I love these ghosts. The ghosts are from facing pages of etchings. And they just make really amazing images. Here is today, still forever. And this is here and now. You're looking into a good thought. All of these things help me to relax, away from the vitriolic language. So all of these drawings play a very, very good role. There is no narrative in this one, so that's good for me because I don't need to explain you anything. These works are more contemplative than anything. Here it's hard to see, but there's a priest being carried by two African men on the side, so it's right behind. And it's like a Madonna and child right in the middle. And it reads, I had a dream that I keep forgetting the more I try to recall it. I think everybody has had that dream. Also, there is no statement in this work. I think you could see Tarzan on the Tarzan and Cheetah and Jane. You barely see them. This one is the intuitive revelation of universal ephemera. Sometimes I just borrow things from art magazines and just put them on there. Sorry about that. And this one distills into something dense and novels, just like what I wrote before. But this is Mary Magdalene washing the feet of Jesus. I don't know if you could see it, but that's right in the background. I have one more thing, and this is, in dark times, we see the world more clearly. That's very clear today with what's happening, especially with the Occupy everything, everywhere. This is the almost imperceptible tension between antecedent and descendant. Another quote from Art Week, maybe, or Art Forum. The invisible essence of things. This is about death pursuing this lady in a horse. And this is the end of my talk. Don't follow me. I am lost too. Thank you very much for listening to such a long talk. Thank you. So I'll be very glad to answer any questions you might have. And I hope I didn't over-explain myself, that you might not have any questions. Okay, great, there is one there, yes.
Hi, I was wondering if you could talk about, in your earlier works, you had a really big figure next to a really small figure. I was wondering if you could talk about the importance of scale in your work.
Yes, that's just a formalistic approach that I like, especially with large pieces. I like to do things that you are going to see from far away. But then I want to push the viewer to get closer, to analyze. In some cases, I didn't show it here, but I even painted a fly in a huge drawing, and it looked like a fly was standing on my drawing. And people were just getting really, really close, and then they realized it was a drawing. So I did things like that. I love to play that. I want to make people walk in and out of a drawing. So it's just to play visually, and hopefully people enjoy it rather than get annoyed by it. So, this is another question. It's hard for me to see because I have the light here. Okay, great.
I was just wondering if you could. I saw the recurring Disney themes throughout, the whole Mickey Mouse sort of turned grotesque, and all these sort of grotesque, at least in my mind, interpretations of Disney. Do you think you could elaborate on that, or explain some of your ideas behind it?
Sure. I grew up with Mickey Mouse as a kid in Mexico, believe it or not. I think it's more the influence of comics in my work, more than just a particular character. I was saying in other lectures that when I was a kid, I thought Mickey Mouse was Mexican because it was translated into El Ratón Miguelito. And it was not until we have a television that we saw the Disney program on Sundays. And then I realized, wow, Mickey Mouse is not Mexican. But I grew up with reading all kinds of American comics, Superman, Batman. One of my favorites was Little Lulu, which at the time I didn't think about it, but it's a very feminist comic. Little Lulu always outsmart Toby and the Only Boys Club, and it was just like very engaging kind of reading. And I was, how can I say, I was very engaged reading those kind of comics. But also there were Mexican comics at the time, some of them that were like Tarzan, but it was the Mexican version. Some old guy who used to be a great soccer player, and they used to play football with coconuts, and nobody else could win them because the coconut was really hard and it would break everybody's legs and heads. But the secret weapon was that this guy, the main hero, who was like 65 years old, is Sekub, that was his name. His secret weapon was that he wouldn't cut his toenails. So he will blow up the balloons, and then they'll have to replace it by a coconut, and then they will win the football soccer game. So that was the kind of comic books I was reading. And when I moved to this country, it was a interesting experience for me because I was missing things I grew up with, but they were mixed. It was not just like feeling that I was missing Mexico. There was something that went across my feelings and experiences. I realized, I mean, I was married to an American when I moved here, and I still married to another American. So I'm stuck happily in this country. And I became an American in 2000. But when I came here, I realized that suddenly you have like a culture, or myself, I have a cultural collision within my own experiences. From growing up in Mexico City, reading American comics, watching any television program from the 60s that was here, it was translated into Spanish, you name it, The Lone Ranger, I Love Lucy, The Twilight Zone, etc. And then at the same time, having a nanny who was an indigenous woman, Nahua Indian, who was speaking to me in Nahua, and then going to the pyramids in Teotihuacan, where my father was from there, and going into the pyramids and fantasizing how the world was 500 years ago. So all those things somehow went through my head when I moved to the States. And I began to express that kind of dual reality that makes me feel that I'm from nowhere and from everywhere. That feeling got even more emphasized when I moved to Europe a couple of times, and I lived long periods, well, about a year at least each time, and 3 months another time. But it made me feel that we are exposed to different cultural icons everywhere. And that became my language. I began to use things that symbolize different things to different cultures to put them together in my work. And to a point that the Mickey Mouse in my work is not Mickey Mouse. It's more like a symbol of cultural collisions, if anything. Otherwise, I would be sued by Disney. If I just painted Mickey Mouse by itself, I would be sued for forgeries. But because I'm using it as a symbol of either cultural imposition or a symbol of dislocation at some point, I'm using it from a critical perspective, and that's considered fair use of copyrighted materials. I no longer use Mickey Mouse that much because, a lot of other artists have used it. And I stopped using it since the mid-90s. And once in a while, I do some little element. Like in my meditational drawings, I did a little bit of the feet in one corner, but that's just like one exception. So I'm trying to move away from it too. I feel bored of my own work, so I try to explore different things. I don't know what I'm doing next, but so far, I'm not doing a lot of cartoonish characters, at least not recognizable. I still love cartooning, and I don't know if I will ever get away from doing editorial cartooning imagery, because that would have been another career I would have pursued, being an editorialist cartooning. So I hope I answered your question. Great, thank you for your question.
I would be curious to know what is your relationship with different mediums and how ideas and medium relate, and on the other hand, how your personal drive to painting or etching in one specific moment would serve your need or your political need to express a certain idea?
It depends on the concept. Some ideas work better as cartooning, especially when you want to move away from the sublime in art. You know, I cannot follow that category myself. Even though I tried in my last drawings, you know, trying to be a little, I couldn't help my sense of humor. But the media, I think, I mean, I've been using painting, drawing, printmaking, and some three-dimensional objects, like like the cans that I did. And painting for me is the most complex of all the mediums. I think I personally have moved away from doing something more interesting with paintings. My paintings resemble, and I was talking a lot about that to some of the grad students today. My paintings are influenced by my prints too. And I was advising some students, okay, be aware of that too. If you want to do more painting, that should be it. Perhaps the only paintings that I have done that are more into painting are the abstract paintings I did. The ones we use text, you know, the red one and the gray. Because that's more about what's happening in the painting, and I still was able to do something. And sometimes I'm very tempted to just move away from making any meaning in my work, and I still have some content in painting. But painting, for me, is the most challenging of all the mediums. In printmaking and drawing, I feel at home, because those two are more forgiving. You could do anything in a drawing, and if you don't like it, you just turn the paper and you put it in the trash. It's just a piece of paper. It's like the most humble of the medium. It's immediate. You don't spend a lot of money, and I think drawing is probably my favorite, and I feel totally at home. Then printmaking is about the same. In printmaking, I feel like because there's such a history of printmaking, of artists making satires, that it's kind of like a niche for me. Like hardly, there's a lot of printmakers also that do satire, but it's very, how can I put it, ignored by the mainstream art world, and that's fine with me. I love the underdog, so I love doing printmaking, and I will keep doing printmaking that way. But certain images, like my Obama portraits, or after Goya etchings, translate political content much better than a painting, I think. Because it has all that history and all that content. And if you go to New York and see this exhibition at the Metropolitan, the one I mentioned that includes the Obama print, it's called The Infinite Jest. You will see what the history of this printmaking medium is with political satire. It's a really funny exhibition. It has some really good crap, literally. They have like a lot of eschatological cartooning characters, and it's just really funny. So that medium, printmaking fits very well with something not artsy or pretentious. And I'm very glad places like the Metropolitan is able to have that exhibition there. So the medium has to connect to the content. So there's a necessary relationship. I'm not sure I'm totally successful in all cases, but I try. And I try to follow whatever my instinct tells me. Like I was explaining in an interview they did to me, like if I had something in mind, that the new medium I would like to try, that would be writing. I would love to do some writing with some of my images of my work. Sometimes I think of writing a story just describing one of my prints, like a Mexican chicken running away from Batman and Robin. You saying that sounds like crazy. So I have a lot of ideas that are kind of narrative that might work better actually in writing. And then I might put some of my work next to the text, and they don't have to illustrate each other, but that would be maybe my next medium, if I had the time to do it. I barely have the time to finish the prints here that I have to finish tomorrow. But anyways, form and content had to make sense to me, and that dictates what media works better. So I hope I answered the question. Great, thanks.
I think we have time for one more question, if anybody has one.
What is your creative process? How do you go from idea to actually producing a piece?
It's a lot of stress. Sometimes I cannot sleep at night because I don't know what I'm doing next day. For instance, when I do my books, I travel. I go to Colorado, and this place where it's sharks. And I just bring my files with me, and I don't know what I'm doing. And when I arrive there, I start getting nervous because I have no idea what I'm going to do. But then I just pick up a general theme. Could be the economy. And I did some works on the economy. I didn't have time to talk about them. And then I depart from that idea and I start putting the symbols that represent that content. When I did, for instance, the book that got me in trouble, the Misadventures of the Romantic Cannibals, that the religious groups were protesting, I just decided to do something about the contradictions of the church with the pedophilia and their homophobia, and not only that, but women cannot be priests or priestesses, or whatever. And so all these kind of things. So I decided to actually do something about it in the work. And then, but I don't work literally. I was not illustrating the pedophilia. I was not illustrating the homophobia, but I just presented a version in which something is very corrupted within the symbology of the book. So that made the work. Same thing with my charcoal drawings. Sometimes I don't know what I'm going to do. And I end up making work that is kind of abstract. This like closing painting. It's I didn't know I was going to have that text, "Don't follow me, I am lost you," until I thought of bumper stickers that car has. Some cars, I saw that in a car in Mexico at some point. So I decided just to, there's a connection with a car. So one thing takes me to another. I try not to have a complete finished idea of any given work because it ends a little too dead for me. So I'd rather give myself a surprise, and sometimes the text don't have to completely connect with the imagery. So it's more like a dance between different elements. And I hope I am able to orchestrate different things in a multilinear narrative rather than a straight 1-2 punch in my work. I hope people get different meanings. Hopefully they don't get angry with me because I just do it to express myself. And when people are open, they understand where I'm coming from, and it gets more of a connection. But I work from very unconscious decisions, and that's the way the work ends, without me knowing exactly what I was doing, and hopefully most of the times being happy with what happened at the end. So I end up with a surprise. Not always that happens. Sometimes I just paint over the whole thing and start again. So, but I don't have a recipe of how to work. And the worst thing is when I don't sleep at night, but that's sometimes when I get my best ideas. And then I just get off the bed, write it down with a piece of paper, then I feel relaxed, and then I fall asleep. So that's a good recipe for insomnia, if you had any of that. A lot of people do. Write down your anxieties, and then you go back to sleep a lot easier. Anyways, thank you very much for all your questions, and now it's dinner time for me, at least. I hope you had dinner. If not, I hope you have a good dinner, too. Thank you.